Howdy, friends. Welcome back to Let's Squawk About It, brought to you by the Poultry Science Association. I'm Andy Vance. I'm one of the staff members here at PSA, and it's a treat to welcome you back to another episode of Let's Squawk About It, where we try to peel apart some of the science behind some of the most important topics in poultry production. Our guest today is Frank Ivey. Dr. Ivey is with Feed to Gain LLC, and we're going to talk about matrix mathematics. You know, Dr. Ivey, I have to admit, I was an agriculture communication major and undergraduate and spent many years as a journalist. And I used to joke that I was a communicator because I was bad at math and science. And here I am hosting a video show about math and science. I'm excited to hear from you about this idea of the matrix mathematics behind growing these birds and some of the things that you and your colleagues have brought to the table to help us better understand why birds grow the way they do and how to influence that. Before we get into your presentation, I wonder if you might share a little bit of background about you, your company, and some of your work over the years as a professional poultry scientist.
All right. I started life as a food technologist working with red meat and then moved back to the live animal. I got my PhD at Oregon State University and got my master's degree at North Carolina State University in food technology. So I knew a lot about muscle, had to learn all about nutrition, and I gratefully ran into a lot of good people who helped me. And I became the vice president of Novus International when it was formed. Before that, I'd worked at Monsanto, which had the production of the liquid methionine product that Novus started out selling. And I was a science fellow there, which was an earned title based on scientific excellence from the perspective of a large chemical company. So I was quite honored to manage that. Across time, I've had a lot of help with models, and that's what I'm going to talk about, is the use of computer models to help with determining matrix values. Among the helpers, the first fellow I ran into that knew a lot about models was a gentleman named Jerry Emmons from Edinburgh University. He and Colin Whittemore had developed a broiler model. Before that, Colin had worked on a swine model, and I bought a copy from them and ran it and learned a lot about models. This was before the Windows era, so you had to enter every value yourself. Eventually made some changes and improved it. The next group that I worked with were Shmuel Hurwitz. Dr. Hurwitz was in Israel, and he and a gentleman named, check my notes, Hovav Talpaz. It's been a while since I've seen either of them. Dr. Hurwitz, unfortunately, has passed away. Hovav, I think, is now living in Texas. They had a very nice broiler growth model, and Novus International bought it. And it was in Fortran. We converted it to a Windows program, and I've been upgrading it and improving it ever since. And even after I retired from Novus, I've kept working with the model. I formed this little company called Feed to Gain LLC, trying to improve feed to gain for people, and I've had pretty good success with it. Not a very big company, though, I'll tell you that. There are other people who, sure.
No, go ahead. I was going to say I'm excited to learn more about the model and what you're doing in today's presentation.
All right. Well, basically, I have to thank Park Waldrop, who's now passed away as well. He did a study with our model showing that it predicted growth better than the other estimates that were available. That was a long time ago. And Rob Gauss, who came to Edinburgh University after I was there and learned a lot about, after I visited there, but I've met Rob several times. Nice gentleman, has his own model. And he recently stated in a paper that a model isn't really very good unless it gives specific calibrations for specific breeds. And I very much agree with that. So that's the feeling I have. I think people should look at models as a method to improve nutrition, and that's really what it's about. So I'll let you start.
Well, let's get right into the presentation because I want to learn more about this, and then we'll follow up with some questions.
I'm going to show you a mathematical technique for fitting an enzyme, fitting the matrix of an enzyme to your own. And we started doing this way back. We ran feeding trials when I was at Novus for a company that wanted to use use milo or sorghum instead of the corn or maize that they were using, and they didn't know what matrix to put on it. We ran a large feeding trial for them, very good customer, and in the end, we were able to have them change from corn to milo with no change at all in performance. So we matched their matrix very nicely. So getting the right values are important. I like to point out, and will in the next slide, that the first model used in broiler production is the least cost blending method, where people take an estimate of their ingredients, we model the ingredients, and we wind up with feed costs that are minimized to meet the requirements that we set. People are very familiar with it. The broiler growth models I worked with started in the late 80s, 1980, and their accuracy and utility have improved with time. Feed variation from the expected nutrients is a major source of variation in the field. Controlling the nutrients gives control over the quality and variation of production. Is a good example of that is NIR, people who use near infrared to evaluate all their bulk ingredients, as I like to call them, do a better job of getting straight performance, smooth performance. An example I'm going to use to show you the method that I've used to determine the value of the enzyme or its effect on the different ingredients was a study that was done in Brazil. These people did it. I'd read their names, but I'm terrible at it, but I do appreciate their work. They did a microbial maramidase study where they used two bulk ingredients, wheat and soybean meal, and they looked at 3 levels of an enzyme that was added. It was published in British Poultry Science, and the authors are not associated with this analysis. We're indebted to them for their efforts, and I admire the quality of their work. Our example is their second study, treatment number 2 is the one that we chose to analyze. It gave the biggest response. And here's a lot of words. It's the abstract from the paper. The important pieces are that you evaluate the effect of graded levels of the enzyme, which was they called a lysozyme. Maramidase is their nickname for it. They looked at the feed intake, feed conversion, feed weight gain, feed conversion, and they used a European index. The important parts are they used 4 diets, a controlled diet following the breeder recommendations. They used a diet supplemented with 25,000, 35,000, or 45,000 units of maramidase. In addition, all experimental diets contained exogenous xylanase, phytase, and a coccidiostat. The importance of that to me is that they've already got 2 enzymes in there. The phytase is probably helping more with the phosphorus than anything else, but the xylanase is also reducing some energy. So we'll see what this new enzyme does combined with the others. The inclusion of maramidase did not change the feed intake significantly. It did increase weight gain, and it did reduce feed conversion. So those are the points in particular. Let me show you how that works. So if we look at wheat, we have an initial value of, say, 3,200 calories, and we improve the digestion by 1%. It goes to 3,254, 2%, 3,319. So now that will affect the growth. Protein the same way. It goes from 10.19, if that's the actual value, up to 10.29, 10.39. So it's getting a 0.1% increase with each percent of improvement. Simple mathematics. Same thing true for soybean meal. And it goes up 46.97, 47.43. Nice regular increases. So what does that do for us? Well, we add to the complexity. These small changes have a big impact on growth. So for example, they had 58% wheat, 34% corn. So we modify those improvements, and together 1% increases the energy in the first diet, by 41 to 41 calories. The 3184 for the second one, up from 3155. So you see a modest change in energy, also a modest change in protein, 23.5, 2407, 19.8, 19.97, or 20, 20.12 effectively. So you can see we're getting a modest change and from those 2 bulk ingredients. Nothing else is changing in the diet. So now lastly, we look to say, well, what happens? Well, here's what the computer model says will happen. If you increase protein in 1% in each of the wheat and soy, you'd expect to see a feed conversion of 1.54, a big improvement over the 1.59, and the age would be effectively the same. So we give a 2% increase, we'll see a feed conversion of 1.526 in 41.9 days. Their study was 42 days, so we're looking for a 153.8, it's right in here, and we're looking for 42 days, which is right in here. So we can see that we have overestimated. 3% is an overestimation of what we want, and we can see that the feed conversion and all fits within only a 1 to 3% change. So now we look to see, okay, I refined that in my model. I kept adding different levels, and we find that it increases energy 1.8% and 1% of protein. We get that closest result to the 2.91 kilos they had, the 1.535 feed conversion, 42 days. And if I used Excel Solver or any other kind of optimization routine that solves, I found that wheat contributed 55 kilocalories and 0.13% an increase in protein. Soybean values were 70.9 kilocalories and 40.4% protein increase, gave that nice growth. So this is what we expect to see from the maramidase when we add it to wheat and soy. We expect the soy to give us 70 calories improvement by weight. And so we'll get smaller than that, of course, in each diet because it's less. One can also look to fit the total value to the enzyme itself for a standalone value, but it's slightly more uncertain because we don't know what happens when we change from wheat, for example, to corn. How does the maramidase affect corn? So if you want to use a pure matrix value for the ingredient, for the enzyme, you really have to be careful with your bulk ingredients. Keep them within your experience. So the long and short is, we can value that, what that enzyme has done, and it doesn't have to be dramatic in order to be very valuable, because what we're doing is improving the nutrients we get from our ingredients, making them more valuable. And a small amount of the enzyme does a big job. And you can use something, once you know how the bird should have grown, what it takes to make the bird grow, once we know the nutrients, energy, protein, amino acids, and in this work, I've assumed that the amino acids become as available as the protein becomes available. So if you get a 1% improvement in protein, my assumption in this work has been you get 1% improvement in lysine availability, methionine availability, whatever those values are. In corn, in wheat, for example here, they come through with the same improvement in protein. That's a basic assumption, and if you have to make a different assumption from that, it gets quite a bit more difficult without more information. So here's a case where we make one change, add the enzyme or not, and we can see how it improves availability of energy and protein in both the wheat and the soy. We can put that into one little package and have a nutrient value for the enzyme, or we can operate with the two different ones. Several people think operating with a value for your bulk ingredient is a more valuable way to go. I've seen a paper by Bedford and Cowlison recently that point out that it's not uncommon to have up 3 enzymes in a diet. So we need to know how each of those enzymes affect. Here we had 2, we added a third. So it's interesting to track that. I'll get to where we can read it more easily. So we know that time in the field is important. So as we make these changes, why do we care? Why do we worry about what happens? I improve the feed efficiency, I improve the growth, I'm really happy with that. But of course, we know we need to control what's going on in the field. If you bring birds into a processing plant a day or 2 early, you've got a crisis. You've got a lot of people who have to work overtime to get those birds off the field and into the sales department while they still weigh the targets that you've set. Energy and protein levels also affect carcass composition, so that having the control of the diet nutrients improves carcass consistency, which is important. So control is really the big issue. Different application doses of enzymes can be evaluated with a system like this. Some companies use an on-top approach. You can use that single matrix value if you want for the on-top approach, and that's a useful thing. We find that both formulating in the enzyme or adding it on top have essentially the same cost basis if you're using an optimized diet for that process. Some people say adding on top has no value. I think we all see the value when we add it on top, and it improves the feed conversion. But if it rushes birds to the plant, you can have trouble. So I'll sum up by saying the method can be used for any ingredient or procedure that results in a change in performance. It could assist in assigning a matrix to a new ingredient. You want to start using an ingredient that you've not used before. You can run a short trial in the field. You can run a test if you have a research farm, and this will help you evaluate that outcome. The critical piece is using a model to get to what ingredients need to change, what values of energy and protein give the growth you see in the trial. Once you have that, then it's a fairly short step to getting to what changes had to happen in your bulk ingredients to get there. I'll say that enzymes have a dramatic value in making ingredients more digestible. The use of a precise model for comparing study results or field results is an effective way to adjust matrix values. Lastly, the broiler models have improved over time and can be easily tested in the field or with a research trial. You can take a published paper of research trial and test a model to see if it's accurate. And I've had people do it, and I do it all the time. So lastly, models are not new. They assist in providing the cost savings nutritionists make. A lot of times I've worked with people who improve their cost, and the boss says at the end of the year, "Where's the money? I don't have any extra money. What's going on? You said you saved us money." Well, if you've got an effective model, you can show what would have happened and what did happen and demonstrate your value clearly. I think nutritionists have trouble demonstrating their value in terms of the savings they create. What they do in the field is very, very clear, but a model helps establish how the changes they make really improve performance, growth, and cost, and lower cost. And that's what the company wants. So if the nutritionist can build a clear case for his value, I think that the bosses and all will value him more highly. That's my hope. I worked with a client once long ago, and we worked for a full year to improve one location's cost. And it happened to be at a time when energy was expensive. So when we were done and the annual review came around for my nutritionist friend, the boss said, "Well, this is great. You saved us a lot of money. Now get that feed conversion down and we'll be really happy." And of course, that's not the answer. The answer was having a low feed conversion was expensive. And the guy paid no attention. The nutritionist was really quite annoyed. He said his boss hadn't listened to anything he'd said. He just said, "Well, wow, that's great. You got cost down for that location. Now get the feed conversion down." No understanding of the trade-offs between feed conversion at times based on ingredient costs. There are times when lower feed conversions are better. Going back up is a real hard sell. Okay, well, that's basically my story. I've had a lot of experience with people. I've seen models save people trouble on other occasions. We can go back to the main screen. I should say we're ready to take that guy down. But I do want to thank you for giving me the chance to show that. It's been fun across the years working with so many wonderful people, and agriculture really brings you to real people.
Yeah. Well said, and I've often commented I love when you were sharing all the different people you've worked with, and I've often said agriculture is a small town, right? You know, the
Yes.
number of people that you work with and interact with, and maybe even more so in our community of scientists. A few questions for you, Dr. Ivey, and one you alluded to there kind of in your final story, talking about the importance of the models and how maybe they help us not only understand what we're doing in the barn as nutritionists, but also to maybe then tell the story of what we've done
Right.
in the barn. But I wanted you to think a little bit more or explain a little bit more about why it's important to evaluate new models for assessing the benefits of a single enzyme, particularly, when you talked about the fact that we might have 2 and 3 enzymes in a ration these days. Why is it important to evaluate those new models for, drilling down to the benefits of a single enzyme?
Well, I think the value the model brings is the ability to drill down. I think the essential question is, how do we formulate to get the right timing of growth and the lowest cost to utilize these enzymes best? And we have to understand what they do. So if you have a diet, I worked with a fellow who added 3 enzymes to his diet. And I said, well, what do they do? He said, I don't know. I said, well, how do you change your ration as costs vary? He says, I don't. I said, well, is that wise? He said, I don't know what else to do. And so we worked with him for a while, and we got to where we could reformulate his feed and save money while still using the 3 enzymes that were added. And we really, oddly enough, never had to know high value of what one enzyme did versus another. We found out what the 3 did and moved forward, because he wasn't going to stop. He had 3 effective salesmen had come through, and he wasn't in a position to say, ladies and gentlemen, let's step back from these, because they all demonstrated savings. So he didn't want to, and didn't need to. What he needed to do was get control, so that as other ingredients changed cost, he could modify those to keep himself at the lowest point. We did a lot of work years ago. The first model I developed was a quadratic model that just looked at interaction between different periods of growth with protein and energy. And what we found was the lowest cost is a pretty flat bottom. When you get to where nutrition is the lowest cost, you get a pretty flat bottom. So getting down there isn't as hard as staying down there. So if you get to a point where today I'm at my lowest cost, 3 months from now, the price of corn and soy may change enough, wheat and soy, whatever you're using, may change enough that you're now on the edge of the upward curve and you're not in the bottom. So guys are used to saying, okay, corn went up, that's energy. I need to move to lower corn, more something else. Well, what should the something else be, and how far do you move? I find most people to make tentative movements, not big movements. They're afraid of big movements. If you have a model that you feel you can rely on and have experience in the field, you can take larger steps and save more money quicker than if you're doing it by feel.
Well, that leads into my next question, because I was thinking about, when you were talking about doing it kind of on the top versus the matrix model, and what I got to thinking about is, that new matrix model, that mathematical model, maybe can help us highlight cases where there's a seemingly small benefit to bird health due to that single enzyme, but could actually have a fairly significant impact. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh, yes, that's a very fair assessment, because there are things, as I say, one change is all it takes for this kind of approach to be useful. So, for example, you could use a probiotic. It's no enzyme, but what it does is seeds the gut with bacteria that help digest things that the bird's not digesting. Obviously, it's got to make a living, so it breaks up something and uses what it needs, and the rest goes for the chicken. So even in simple examples like that, probiotic, okay, it improves feed conversion. Years ago, we got in trouble because we claimed that adding methionine to animal feed improved feed conversion. Oh, I guess it was where we got in trouble was we were adding a bacterial inhibitor that improved feed conversion, and the government said, our federal government said, that's a drug claim, you can't say that. So we didn't, but we sure demonstrated it over and over and over. And we could have valued what that enzyme, what that microbial antimicrobial was doing based on this. It gives you this many points of feed conversion, this much on the gain, and it must have improved the digestion this much, the recovery of nutrients by the bird of this much. And that's really what we're after, is what's the bird getting, and how do we manage to get that answer?
I always spent many years in the media space in the feed industry, and I always got a kick out of hearing guys talk about the number of things that the product actually did that you couldn't say in an ad or an article or whatnot. Because God bless our regulatory friends, very important, very important.
Well, it is.
As we get around to kind of wrapping up our time together, Dr. Ivey, I wanted to ask as a bit of a wrap up question. what's the most important thing? If you wanted to boil our talk down today, 20 some minutes of conversation down to one or two key takeaways for both the producer who might be watching this, as well as the poultry scientists, the
Right.
nutritionists who might be watching this, what would you say are the most important things to take away from your research and your decades of experience here working with models?
I'd say that number one is you want to be able to control what you're doing. You have to understand it to control it. Now, that's what I think these good broiler models do for people is give better understanding of what's going to happen when you make a change. I had a fellow call me up and say, I made the change you told me about. I got within 1 point of feed conversion, 0.01 of the feed conversion number you told me I'd get. I said, well, isn't that pretty good? And he says, I never knew what it should be. He says, that's great. So that's the kind of control you want. You want to be able to make a change in the field and have confidence that it's going to have these effects. Adding an enzyme the first time is taking a step of faith because you don't know exactly what's going to happen. Once you do it, you ought to know what happened, and you ought to be able to implement that knowledge clearly. The other thing I stay on, and I've said it already, is the boss looks at feed costs. The nutritionist looks at everything, health of the bird, growth of the bird, all those things. And the boss comes back and says, well, where's all that money? And I've heard that myself when I was working in a slaughter plant for a little company in Smithfield, Virginia. I was their manager of research, and they said, okay, we made the changes you said, but gosh, at the end of the day, we don't have any more money today. I said, well, you spend it on other stuff. But you can't get away with that. You have to have evidence. And I think using these models, which is what we're all talking about, artificial intelligence these days. And that's where this is. This lives in the artificial intelligence kind of thing. We take what we learn and we build it into a program that gives you, clicks out answers. So those are the 2 points. The nutritionist needs to be able to document what he's done. And I think the whole company needs to be in control of what's going on in their fields.
All right, Dr. Frank Ivey, our guest in this edition of Let's Squawk About It. Thank you so much for your insights and expertise. And friends, I would encourage you, if you haven't done so, you can find Dr. Ivey online at feed2gain.com. That's feed2gain.com is his email address there. Information about his research. Would highly encourage you to visit and connect. And Dr. Ivey, thanks for joining us on
well,
this
thank
episode.
you so much. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, friends, I want to update you on a few other things happening in the Poultry Science Association, other content that you might want to participate in. I would invite you to join us for Let's Squawk About It every month. If you've missed any of our previous episodes, past seasons are available on our YouTube channel. You can go back and watch other interviews with experts like Dr. Ivey, but you can also join us in our next Poultry Science Association quarterly webinar coming up on June 27th. Save the date. We're going to be featuring a roundtable discussion about how to get published in our journals, the Journal of Poultry Science, as well as the Journal of Applied Poultry Research. We'll have our editors-in-chief, Dr. Mike Kogut, Dr. Brian Fairchild. We'll be discussing things that you need to know to get published in our journals. The two of them are a wealth of information, and will answer a lot of common questions about things that you as an author or researcher can do to improve your chances of getting a favorable decision when you submit your articles for consideration. Other date that you need to have on your calendar coming up, the first week in July, second week, I guess, technically, I'll be in Philadelphia the first week of July getting ready for the annual meeting, but the PSA annual meeting is coming up July 10th through the 13th. Registration is now open, and hundreds of you have already registered. But if you are one who has not registered yet, go to Poultry Science Association's website and register now. You can take advantage of our discounted rates through June 30. Rates will go up July 1. And I would encourage you not only to go and register now, but also make sure you have your hotel room booked as well. The room block is filling up, and we want you to be able to stay with us in Philadelphia for our biggest scientific program yet. Approaching 600 abstracts and poster presentations there, as well as 13 symposia. Tremendous number of scientific presentations happening at that annual meeting. You can get the full agenda available at our website as well. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Let's Squawk About It. Until next time, for the Poultry Science Association, I'm Andy Vance, wishing you a profitable rest of your day.